Hello, my name is Edward Hughes. I'm the president of the HBS Club of San Diego. Let me share with you a few slides as we start this presentation. So welcome to our event today. Before I introduce our guest, just a few things. So it's great to have everybody here. As many of you know, we do these CEO forum events, and so I hope everyone is doing well. We have obviously a bunch of HBS club members, but we also have a number of guests. So thank you for joining us. Our mission as a club is to continue to educate leaders who make a difference in the world and make San Diego a great place to live and work. And we do that through a number of programs, first of which is our CEO Forum program. And obviously over the last couple of years, we've gone online and done this, which is great because it means we get access to not only HBS professors, but also CEOs from around the world. And so, as you can see, we've had a really good list of folks, whether it's Nobel Prize winning economists, head of McKinsey, billionaire activist investors, a number of HBS professors, a variety of CEOs from a number of companies here. Recently, we had the CEO of Cirrus. We did an event also recently at Stone Brewing, which is a lot of fun with Maria Stipp at Stone. So this has really been a great opportunity to leverage the technology to get access to people all around the world. So we're super excited with that, and hopefully you guys are enjoying this kind of program. We've got a couple of people coming up as a board. We thought it'd be kind of interesting to talk about some very specific things relating to San Diego and water and power. Obviously, as everybody knows, water is in a short commodity, and power and water keep going up in pricing. So trying to understand a little bit more about the dynamics of that. So we've got the GM of the San Diego Water Authority and the CEO of San Diego Community Power talking to us in the new year. We're in the middle of we're getting close to finalizing our for-profit management development program, which has been going great. We're going to start soon with the non-profit management program in January. So we're super excited to be doing that. We, as many of you know, are big advocates for social enterprise. Part of making San Diego a great place to live and work is to have a good, strong nonprofit community. And so we've just hit a milestone on that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We also do a number of social networking events in January 20th. We've just literally moved that date. It was the 19th, but we're going to do an event at the Salk Institute with the chief scientific officer there. And then we're going to do a fun event at the San Diego Opera, the Puccini Duo. So those are some of the events coming up. On the social enterprise front, couple of things that we do. One is that we have a CEO program where we send either the CEO or executive directors of local nonprofits back to HBS to do a week-long intense program called Strategic Perspectives in Nonprofit Management. It's been a game-changing event, and we've had 41 fellowships we've given out over the last 17 years to go back to participating in this. The second thing we do is we run this local nonprofit program where we bring a little bit of HBS to San Diego. We run 14 cases on Monday evenings on February 6th through March 27th. All HBS cases taught by HBS alum. To local nonprofit managers and directors here, and it's charged a modest price of $575. So if you are on a board of a nonprofit and you think they may be interested in that, please check out our website, or hopefully you're getting plenty of emails relating to this program coming up as well. Recently, we just hit a milestone. So as a club, we're proud of the fact that we've invested in now $500,000 back into the San Diego nonprofit community through a combination of management development, as well as some cash donations as well. So we had a little feature on the KUSI recently about that. So that's a really cool feature. So everybody who's been involved in that program over the years, thank you for doing this. It's I think we've had a huge impact on hundreds of thousands of people here in San Diego by helping people get better education, hopefully helping them run their organizations better. So so super excited. So today's event, we're going to start with the professor who's going to give a presentation, and then we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. In order to make sure that we can hear the professor talk. We've got this in a webinar format, so I'd ask that you type your questions into the Q&A or the chat, and then we can address them as we go forward. So let me stop sharing and introduce our guest today. So Professor Chandra, I happened to meet a few months ago at an event at Greg Lucia's house, and he was talking about some of the great work that he's doing and HBS is doing in the life sciences space. And I know when I graduated, life sciences wasn't really a big part of the program there. But the professor is obviously a professor at the HBS in the MBA program. He's the faculty chair of a joint program, MS MBA program between HBS and Harvard. He's professor of public policy and director of health policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. A lot of his research is in relating to innovation and pricing in biopharma. And today he's going to talk to us a bit about the 5 forces that are shaping the life sciences industry. So with that, Professor Chandra, we are super excited to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Edward. It's such a delight to see you again and be part of this great webinar. So I'm here to talk about 5 big forces, before the biopharma life sciences industry. But there's actually a 6th force that I would like to introduce, which is all the work we're doing at the business school around the opportunity with the life sciences. And this is not a talk that I can give in a lot of cities, but for reasons that will be very obvious to you in a minute, I wanted to highlight the tremendous role of 4 American cities for innovation in the life sciences. And they are San Diego, New York, the Bay Area, and Boston. And these 4 cities collectively account for 25% of the world's, the planet's innovation in the life sciences. And it's a story that I think folks in these 4 cities understand, but a lot of people don't understand. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about a new MS MBA program that we launched at the business school, because once I kind of get you through this 2-minute video, you can see it's 2 minutes and 50 seconds long, you'll get a sense of what we've been up to at the business school. And then I can use that to talk about a variety of other forces facing the industry.
History of excellence in training.
So this is a video that we made.
It's going to be the century of emerging technologies in the life sciences field.
We're now at a period of our understanding of the human body that we can begin to seriously think not about treatments, but about cures.
But I don't think that an individual scientist really knows exactly how to take the basic science discovery and make that a drug that we can actually bring to market. So the idea here is, let's collaborate with the best and the brightest scientists. Let's bring people to Harvard Business School, give them an MBA, but also give them amazing science education, which allows them to lead the next generation of biopharma companies.
We're excited to launch this new MS MBA program because it fills a need of people who'd like to make a difference in the world by developing new drugs and new medicines. They already know enough science to see the promise, but what they're missing is a business sense of how to commercialize science.
My guess is in a decade, you will be hard-pressed to get a position in a biotech or pharma company without having had an experience like this. The core of the curriculum is an understanding of how to take opportunities to invest and evaluate them scientifically, medically, and ethically.
Students in this program will have access to HBS faculty members and faculty members from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences and Harvard Medical School present in the classroom at the same time.
We're delighted to collaborate between my department and the Harvard Business School. The business school has a tradition and a history of excellence in training managers and leaders in new areas.
But one also needs mastery of the basic science. And what better place to learn that from than the Department of Stem Cell and Regenerative Biology? They've thought long and hard to do science to heal humanity.
I can't imagine a better place to have this kind of program than in Boston.
Because it is, at the moment, the biomedical capital of the world.
There is no other city in the world that has the agglomeration of industry, hospitals, scientists, and great universities, all sitting a mile and a half apart from each other.
I'm excited about the prospect that we're going to attract really ambitious people who think that they can completely change the way we think about treating disease.
In other words, we want to provide leadership for the whole scientific medical enterprise.
People who believe it is within our scientific and economic grasp to reduce human suffering in the world. Those are the people who should definitely apply.
So that's our program. And, we just today, this afternoon, I was sitting down with Mark Fishman, who you saw in the video, and we selected the 4th cohort who will start in the fall. Our first cohort started in the middle of COVID. They've now graduated. We have the 2nd and 3rd cohort both on campus, and the 4th will come next year. So we're very excited. If you have students that you're mentoring, employees, who've always thought about the life sciences, but might not have thought about combining the life sciences with the great education from HBS, you should drop us a line and you should encourage them to apply. I'm very proud of all the things that we've done with this program. And in the chat is open. You can type in your questions about how this all works, but it's basically 2 years. You get the MBA that many of you have, but at the same time, you're also getting this MS. So you're working twice as hard. We grab your summers, we grab your January, we don't let you go home early, but you take a lot of great science classes from some of the leading scientists at the university, and at the end of it, you get an MS MBA degree. So that's what we're doing. And you hear me in the video at one point make this claim where I say, Boston is the biopharma capital of the world. And I was challenged by a lot of people at other universities. So I thought, maybe I should quantify why I said what I said. And this is where I'm going to connect Boston to San Diego. So I'm going to now share my screen again. And here we go. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Here we go. And what we did was we looked at articles published in just 3 top journals. This is a very simple way of doing it. Science, Nature, Cell, CNS, right? These are the top science journals. And we asked.
So what we're seeing is something called Lost Einsteins.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for flagging that. I don't know why you're seeing Lost Einsteins, but this is why you're here to guide me, Edward. I don't want you to see Lost Einsteins. The Lost Einsteins are coming, by the way. So they're part of this talk. So let's stop this. Are you still seeing only Lost Einsteins?
No, that's gone away. Something came up for a second. Look, a couple of tables, data tables.
Yeah, that's what I want you to see. I want you to see some tables, and then I'll take you to pictures in a second. Here we go. Edward, what do you see now?
I see the tables, but not in slideshow mode.
Okay, how are we looking now?
And now you're in slide. Now we see just the one table, table 1, volume of basic science.
Yep. So what I did was just look at the table on the left, which is the big table. And you ask, if you look at the big countries, 20 largest countries in the world that publish in these top 3 science journals, who are they and what share of worldwide output do they account for? And you'll see at the very top, ranked number 1 is the United States, which now accounts for about 55% of worldwide output in the basic science part, in the fundamental science part of the life sciences. So what do I mean by that? I'm not looking at clinical trials, right? I'm not looking at patents. I'm just looking at ideas for new drugs, like the first paper that discovered mRNA or the discovery of DNA, papers like that, foundational science papers. And the US accounts for about 55% of the world's output, followed by the United Kingdom at about 8%, Germany at 7%, China's a new entrant, almost 6%, Switzerland at 3%. But here's what's interesting. If you ask, what about, American cities? Boston accounts for about 9% of the world's output of basic science. And you can see San Diego accounts for 2.5% of the world's output on basic science. These are extraordinary facts, because what it means is if you compare the table on the right to the table on the left, and they're completely comparable, San Diego as a city produces more basic science than the entire economy of Japan, the entire economy of Australia. It's about the same size as the entire economy of France in terms of its impact on very impactful basic science. So, I think all of us are familiar with this idea that the US is responsible for bringing a lot of drugs to market and that the world sort of free rides on American innovation. But I think what this is saying is that even in the area of basic science research, you see the United States and a handful of American cities, they're really doing the bulk of scientific innovation around the world. And then I think what makes it personal for me and for many of you on the call is the share of worldwide output that's accounted for by just a few universities. So Harvard as a university, and I'm not including the Harvard hospitals here, accounts for about 4.35% of worldwide scientific output. The UCs do extremely well. So if you look at UCSF, if you look at Berkeley, if you look at UC San Diego, if you look at UCLA, the UC system, the individual campuses are really of the same size as entire countries. And this is incredibly important for those of us who are committed to the ecosystem, because it is these ideas that come out of our universities here and around the world that then go on to become the great life sciences companies, not just companies making medicines, but companies making diagnostics. A company that might make PCR equipment or a sequencer ultimately, traced its origins back to a paper in one of these journals. Now, I'm not going to show you this, but there's a very tight correlation between this kind of research that I'm looking at in these tables and clinical trials and patents. And so, a lot of my research is showing the very tight correlation between early basic science research and a lot of inventions that come later and investments that come later. This next slide is not going to be surprising to you. If you look at where VC dollars go in the life sciences, they go to those 4 cities, right? So the people are always like, well, why do the VCs go to cities like San Diego and New York? And why is it that they don't go to cities like Chicago? And the reason is a lot of the basic science emanates from cities like San Diego and New York. And so unsurprisingly, whether you're looking at biotech or you're looking at pharmaceuticals or you're looking at devices, that is where the money goes. And one of the things behind our program, the MS MBA program, is helping VCs, helping large pharma companies, helping private equity companies make their investments better than they have. So here's a fact also from my research on what the returns after an IPO look like in the biopharma industry. So every little blue line here is the 5-year return from the date of the IPO for a particular company that IPO'd. And what you can see all the way around the left is that there's 1 or 2 or 3 companies that essentially carry this entire portfolio. The median company, which would be a company right in the middle of the screen, lost money, right? 3 quartiles of this distribution lost money. So the entire second quartile has a median 1-year return of negative 26%. Right? It's really the top tail of these companies and the incredible returns that they have that carry the entire portfolio. So in other words, if we reduce the returns to even 1 or 2 of these companies through some kind of blunt price regulation or change in incentives, that my sense is that would wipe out the incentives to invest in the entire industry. So anything that we can do as academics, as scientists, as finance professors, as investors to improve the quality of the capital allocation here would be very, very good. So I think trying to do better in this graph is one of the motivations behind the MS MBA program. But there is another motivation as well. And the other motivation is that we don't appear to be getting all the people who are capable of incredible entrepreneurship into the life sciences. So let me motivate that fact by showing you a a slide called Lost Einsteins. It comes from my colleague Raj Shetty in the economics department. And Raj makes a very simple point. He says, let's look at kids who have top math scores, but who come from poor families versus families from the top fifth of the income distribution. And let's look at the rate at which these children patent anything. And so you can see the patenting rate per 1,000 kids for kids with top math scores from the top fifth of family income is about 6.5 patents per 1,000 children. And if you look at their classmates who had top math scores, but who came from the bottom fifth of family income, their patenting rate is 1/6 as large. It's 1.2 in 1,000. Now look over on the right. Look at kids with low math scores, but who come from more privileged backgrounds. Their patenting rate is also 1.2 in 1,000. So, kids with low math scores who come from more privileged backgrounds are patenting at the same rate as children from less privileged backgrounds with top math scores. And so Raj is very worried about this because he says the world is missing out on inventions, on discoveries from some very talented kids. And so when we launched the MSMBO program, we spent a lot of time thinking about how to make entrepreneurship in the life sciences more available to people who might not have become entrepreneurs. And we care about this for so many reasons. We don't just want patents, right? That's not the goal here. Patents is just a blunt measure of the level of innovation that a society is engaged in. I think these kids who come from different backgrounds might also be interested in different diseases. And the reason I say that is a great paper in Science that was published by my colleague at Harvard Business School, Rem Koenig. And Rem has this paper that came out in Science last year. So this was on the 18th of June, 2021. And he published this paper in Science where he makes a very simple point. He says, look at this graph below. It's certainly the case that a lot of medical innovations come from labs and teams that are male majority teams. So most of the people in the team are men. And while there's been steady increase in female majority teams, so teams where the majority of scientists were women, it's still mostly a male enterprise. And you could look at this graph and you could say that is terrible, right? But you want to know, why is it terrible? And the reason it's terrible is his next graph, which is where he shows that inventions from male majority teams are much more likely to be focused on male diseases, whereas inventions from female majority teams are more likely to be focused on diseases that are female focused. So a female majority research team is much more likely to study breast cancer, much more likely to study ovarian cancer, much more likely to study something like depression after the birth of a child than a male majority team. He's not saying that men don't study these diseases, but they're a lot less likely to study these diseases. So one of our goals with the MSMBA program is to have a diverse group of students, and not diversity for diversity's sake, but diversity because we think that students of different backgrounds are often drawn to very different diseases. And the world would benefit from having a much broader funnel of scientists and scientist investors than we have seen in previous years. So that's the reason we're very interested in making sure that we get a very broad, very diverse group of students into the program. So this was kind of the preamble to my talk. I think that it's very exciting to be here because you in San Diego are engaged in the same kinds of very big, broad thinking around scientific innovation that we are in Boston. And so anything I can do to increase that partnership, to get you involved in our program, to get your advice for our program. What are we missing in the program? What is missing in the curriculum? Or if you're in Boston and you want to come talk to the class or advise one of the students and be a program advisor, please do write to me, because I think that there's only, as you can see from my earlier table, a handful of cities where I can reach out and you will really understand what we're doing. Now, pulling away from Harvard and HBS, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about 5 very broad forces shaping value-based healthcare with an eye to the life sciences. So I'm not going to be talking about the delivery system as much as the life sciences. And so I think of those 5 forces as the following. The first is the US over time is increasingly relying on Medicare and Medicaid. So the public payers are playing a much larger role in coverage. And the challenge with public provision of healthcare is that the plans that Medicaid offers or the plans that Medicare offers can sometimes be incredibly arbitrary and ad hoc. Medicaid in Texas, for example, will only cover 3 medicines. So think about that. You're a Medicaid beneficiary in Texas, you're poor, you're insured through Medicaid. If you need 4 drugs, they'll only cover 3. That's arbitrary. There's no way that that can be the right answer. In Medicare, as many of you know, there's if you're in traditional Medicare, then there's a 20% co-insurance for all the drugs that you would receive in a physician's, all the infusion therapies that you might receive. So if you need a PD-1 inhibitor like Keytruda, and Keytruda is $250,000, $300,000 a year, there's no out-of-pocket max. You'd have to pay 20%. So 20% of 300,000 is 60,000. We might be able to afford it. We would be challenged, but the typical Medicare beneficiary is only earning $25,000 a year. How could they afford $60,000? And so here we are as a country talking about Medicare for all, but we've not really grappled with how do we make Medicare better, much better, before we start to talk about rolling it out to everybody. I am at the same time very troubled by what the private plans are doing. So I'm moving to the second bullet point. So, the public payers have arbitrary plan design, but the private plans rely heavily on high deductibles and fairly arbitrary cost sharing, which also has been shown to worsen people's health. So it's not the case that the commercial sector here gets it right and that government is the only entity getting it wrong in terms of plan design. I think that the first and the second bullet point have really frustrated patients and doctors. Patients and doctors are sick and tired of facing arbitrary co-insurance, arbitrary cost sharing, and that in turn breeds ideas like the Inflation Reduction Act, where Congress comes along and says, you know what, you, the private sector, are not able to do it. We, the public sector, are not really able to do it either. So we're just going to get to a world where we start to mandate prices. And I think that the challenge with mandating prices is that the government doesn't know which price to mandate. And if you're thinking about the graph where I showed you the tremendous risk faced by the life sciences industry, the great worry with government price regulation is that the government will look at the prices charged by a handful of companies and whack the entire industry. I think what's very exciting about our industry is points 4 and 5. The industry is finally ready to deliver cures. And any payers who are able to think about how we value paying for cures will be payers that will do extremely well because patients want to be covered by insurance companies that cover cures. And I think fifth, we're going to see a wave of enabling technologies. This is a term that I learned from my friend Greg Lucier when I was at his house a few weeks ago. And Greg and I think similarly. I wasn't calling these technologies enabling technologies, and he was. These are technologies like better diagnostics, for example. So not a better drug, but a better diagnostic that tells the doctor that the drug will work in Edward, but not in Amitabh. So you give it to Edward and you don't give it to Amitabh. Alternatively, these enabling technologies are better ways to diagnose disease earlier and faster. So we can treat the patient using existing therapies without putting a lot of demand on the system to innovate in new therapies. So the rest of my talk is really going to be filling in the details on these 5 forces and why I think these 5 forces are important and how we might manage them. So I think, first, let me start with good news. The good news is that we don't have to really talk that much about universal coverage in the United States anymore because we've essentially achieved that goal. The uninsurance rate now runs at about 10%. Half of that group, half of the 10%, are eligible for free coverage. So if they wanted health insurance, they could sign up for health insurance and they would have 0 premium. So the challenge is to get them to sign up, not that we don't have free coverage for them. Right? So universal coverage has essentially been achieved in the United States. And so I know we keep talking about the fact that we still have to achieve it, but it's really a last mile problem, right? Which is very different than the world we were in, say a decade ago, where we had 45 million uninsured people in the United States. What we're left with, though, is the challenge of growing Medicaid, growing Medicare. Medicaid is now the largest insurer in the United States, right? There's 50 Medicaid programs. Medicaid insures about 70 million people. Medicare right now insures about 60 million people, and it's growing rapidly as we age as a country. And that's the challenge, right? We've insured the uninsured mostly through public programs. These are the public programs which have fairly arbitrary plan design. In Medicare Part D, as you can see, you had until very recently this donut hole where you were insured, and then at some point, about $2,500 of drug spending, you were uninsured. And while you were uninsured, you paid 100%. That was the donut hole. And then at some point, you spent so much on your medicines that you got covered again, right? That makes no sense. Like no private plan would really design health insurance benefit in this way. But the government did so, and the government did so because it was trying to balance the budget, and it didn't have money to insure people in the middle. Now, it turns out when you design health insurance this way, it can have deadly consequences for patients. So I've done work showing that when people fall into the donut hole, when they face that high coinsurance, they cut back on life-saving drugs. They don't just go to the hospital, they die, because they're not cutting back on the right drugs. They're cutting back on all the wrong drugs for reasons we don't understand, but the point is they cut back on those drugs and then they die. So that was never the goal of the program, but this kind of arbitrary plan design can result, it's not just saving money, it's also saving, it's not saving lives. That's the problem with it. So I think that's something that these are the kinds of things that we would think about. In Part B, like I said, cost sharing is incredibly high. 20% cost sharing for all the outpatient therapies that you would get infusion. A new drug for Alzheimer's would likely be one covered by Part B. It results in people cutting back on valuable drugs. And if they don't cut back, it certainly means that there's a lot of medical debt and financial distress. But as you can see in the lower right, this is not just a problem of government. If you look at Medicare Advantage plans, in Medicare Advantage plans, which are private, they're offered by all the large insurers, there too, people face extremely high coinsurance. So Medicare Advantage plans don't have to add a 20% coinsurance. They could be delivering valuable health insurance, but they're not. And so I think this frustrates patients greatly because they're saying, I have metastatic colon cancer, or I am about to die of this disease. Why am I paying a 20% coinsurance? How could I overuse my drug for metastatic cancer? Or how would I overuse a medicine for macular degeneration? I'm going blind. Which patient who's not going blind wants a injection in their eye for macular degeneration? So I think a lot of these old ideas around the reason we have cost sharing is to reduce overuse probably don't apply to some of the medicines that we're talking about. There can be overuse of healthcare, but I'm not sure how they can be overuse of some of these therapies. I don't know which patient is trying to overuse their insulin, which diabetic is saying, I'm just going to take some extra insulin today because the copay is 0. Probably we've not met such a diabetic before, and I think it's time to actively engage in that conversation. I think, in private plans, like the employer plans, you can see heavy reliance on high deductible health plans. And the high deductible health plans certainly save money. No question about that. I don't dispute that they don't save money. The problem with them is that patients don't know what to cut back on. And so they save money, they keep premiums low, but they land up with some damaging healthcare consequences that really frustrate employees a fair bit. You can see in employer plans, again, there's very little restriction on what drugs employers cover and how they set up their plans, but employers have chosen to have plans where there is really no out-of-pocket limit on specialty drugs, meaning there's no out-of-pocket cap on specialty drugs. So if your child has cystic fibrosis and you're working for an employer, 30% of employers will put you in a plan where if the cystic fibrosis drugs are viewed as being specialty drugs, and they almost definitely are, there's a 30% chance that you're working for an employer where you would be responsible for 20% of $1 million, even as an employer. So clearly the private sector has not innovated in this space as much as we would have liked it to have. So I'm going to skip this slide over here and talk about some of the other things that are running around. I think that this frustration has caused Congress to come in and say, we're going to legislate some caps. We're going to say out of pocket in Medicare Part D can only be $2,000 a year, right? And we're going to say that because insulin can't be overused, we're going to limit the patient price of insulin to be $35. And so I think the first bullet point is highlighting the direction that Congress is taking. But with that comes a variety of other problems. So I like the first bullet point a lot. I think this was good. On the other hand, which I think is a lot less good, is we now have the federal government negotiating drug prices for 20 top-selling drugs 9 to 13 years from now. So not right away, but 9 to 13 years from now, we are going to see these drugs have their prices regulated. And we will also be in a world where if you raise your prices as a company faster than inflation, you will have to provide additional rebates back to the US government. And let's kind of spend a little bit of time trying to understand the second and third bullet point. The second and third bullet points, I think, are not well understood. The first is that premiums are going to increase. I don't think folks have really understood why that'll happen, but the reason it will happen is because there's an out-of-pocket cap now on what patients will pay. So patients are not going to be facing cost sharing, which also means that plans can't use cost sharing to move patients from one drug to another drug. They've lost that tool. So what do they have to do? They can only do one of two things, or both things. They can raise premiums, which the public is not going to like, or they're going to rely a lot more on utilization management tools like prior authorization, which is going to annoy their doctors as well. Right? Doctors don't want to spend hours filling out 25 pages of prior authorization forms. What else will happen? I think that Congress in the IRA says that it's going to negotiate the price of small molecule drugs 9 years after the drug launches, and of the large molecule biologics 13 years after they launch. It's not clear why Congress likes large molecule drugs. Why does it want to negotiate the price of large molecule drugs 13 years after launch, but small molecule drugs 9 years after launch? If anything, I would have thought the small molecule drugs are easier to take generic. So I would have preferred a world where we used a number like 13 years for all drugs instead of privileging a particular modality. So my guess is that R&D will start to shift gradually towards larger molecule drugs because there's a greater reward period for them. I think more challenging, though, is that the incentives to invest in long-term evidence generation have just been muted, right? So in the past, I, as a company, had an incentive to launch a drug. I wasn't sure of the evidence, so I did a lot of clinical trials showing doctors and patients that my drug work didn't have the side effects that they thought that my drug might have, that the drug worked better when combined with other drugs. Now, if I'm going to get my profits haircutted in year 9 or 13, I have less of an incentive to produce that kind of evidence because 9 or 13 years after I've launched the drug, the government's just going to mandate a very low price. I think because the pricing authority of the government applies to drugs that are heavily used by Medicare and Medicaid populations, there's going to be less of an incentive to make drugs that benefit Medicare and Medicaid populations, which I think is very sad because we really do need innovation in Alzheimer's. We really do need innovation in schizophrenia and depression drugs, which are disproportionately covered by Medicaid, and we're a little bit less likely to see that. I think also, finally, all of this is going to probably threaten the biosimilar industry because in the past, the biosimilar industry had a strong incentive to come in and add some price competition. Now, if the government's getting a very low price, just by its ability to demand a very low price, there's going to be a lot less need for the biosimilar industry to be as large, as thriving as we wanted it to be. And I think the existential question for the industry is not whether the IRA as written affects R&D, it affects R&D just a little bit because the government's only negotiating the prices of 10 to 20 drugs. But the IRA as written could easily be expanded. I mean, very quickly, the government could say, today we're negotiating the prices of 10 drugs, but tomorrow we're going to negotiate the price of 200 drugs or 2,000 drugs. That kind of policy uncertainty is something that's very hard for pharma companies, biotech companies, venture capitalists to grapple with, right? Than if we knew that the government would stick to 10 or 20 drugs. So this is how it will all play out. Nothing's going to happen right away. In 2026, I think you'll start to see the negotiations start for about 10 drugs, and that negotiation will increase over time. So it'll all take a while to settle in. I think the law is here to stay. I don't think anyone's going to change the law. The law has some good ideas in it, like I said, very good ideas around reducing cost sharing. And I do think that what I also like about the law is sunsetting the protection that companies receive. I just don't like the fact that it's 9 for small molecules and 13 for large molecules. Like I said, it would be a lot cleaner if we just said it was 13 years across the board for all the molecules. And let's talk about the exciting things, right? So I don't mean to be Debbie Downer over here. You know, what about these cures that are coming our way? Here's the first kind of potential cure that has already been on the market for a long time. This is Luxturna. This is a gene therapy for inherited blindness. So if a child were born blind because both of their copies of RPE65 were mutated, they would receive this eye injection, Luxturna, which was then manufactured by Sparks, but Sparks was acquired by Roche. The drug retails for about $800,000. Sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually not a lot of money given that this is a very, very, very rare disease. There's only about 100 kids a year who would need this treatment. So if we gave Luxturna to every child in America who needed Luxturna, even at $800,000 per kid, it would raise our premiums as a society by 30 cents. And our typical premium is about $12,000. So $12,000 would become $12,033, right? And it's just simply because even though the drug is high priced, it's just very, very few patients. But I think the challenge before our industry is a drug like this. On the right, you'll recognize Doug Melton. He was in the video with me on the MS MBA program. He's one of Harvard's most famous scientists. And my belief is that one day he'll win the Nobel Prize for curing type 1 diabetes, right? His kids were born with type 1 diabetes. He didn't want to see them take insulin for the rest of their life. And so he has spent the past 20 years thinking about how to talk to the stem cells that live in our bone marrow, persuading them to reproduce as beta cells in the pancreas. And if they're able to do that, then they can secrete insulin and the patient would be cured. And on the left is patient number 1. So this is the wonderful New York Times article that Gina Colada wrote about Semma. Semma is the company that Doug founded, that Vertex acquired for a little less than $1 billion. There's a lot of R&D, very high risk R&D that Vertex is currently engaged in. I don't know if Vertex will be successful. I don't know if Doug will be successful, but if they are, or if some other company is, the world and scientists would have cured type 1 diabetes. And if they can cure type 1 diabetes, then one day they might turn their attention and cure type 2 diabetes, right? So think about the opportunity here before us as investors and as scientists, and we want to be on the side of that opportunity because that opportunity could like erase these conversations about, gee, is insulin high priced or not? Patients could be cured of diabetes. So I think the plans that can engage with this innovation and figure out how much we should pay for this kind of innovation will do extremely well, right? Like clearly there's some price at which, you know, even a cure for type 1 diabetes would not be worth it. So what's the price at which it would be worth it, right? And how do we pay that price without making sure that premiums don't jump from $12,000 a year to $50,000 a year, because that's something that people just can't afford. I think what companies and plans that are doing this well will have to do is they'll have to do 2 things. The first is they're going to have to think a lot more seriously about the value of a medicine than they have. So this is the conventional way that a very thoughtful plan would go about assessing the value of a medicine, right? You would look at clinical outcomes. You would absolutely look at clinical outcomes, survival, disease-free survival, recurrence. you would also look at the toxicity of the drug. You would look at adverse events. You would look at physical functioning. What are the kinds of physical activities that this child or a juvenile can do? Does a drug affect cognitive functioning, emotional functioning, social functioning? And we total all of that up, and that would be the value of the drug. But there's so many other things about medicines. There's so many other sources of value that this simple chart over here doesn't capture. So let me just illustrate with something known as the ICER value flower. Society might value drugs that have, for example, what I call as an economist, real option value. So imagine a drug for ovarian cancer. That's a good drug, but not a great drug. So it gives women with ovarian cancer 3 months of survival. 3 months of survival is pretty good, right? But it's not great. But one of the reasons why the drug is valuable is because in those 3 months, another drug comes to market, and that drug adds an additional year of life. So the value of the drug that I took is not the 3 months of survival, but the option to bridge until the next drug came along. Not all drugs have high option value, but in areas of medicine where the clock speed of innovation is high, drugs will have some drugs will have incredibly high real option value, right? Or fear of contagion, a drug that is like a vaccine that reduces the chances that I get a drug would be an example of a drug that is especially valuable to people, or a drug that acts in very sick people, right? Where the disease is incredibly severe, like blindness, might have much more value than a drug that still generates or improves sight for people who already had some vision. These are notions of value that we've just begun to quantify. I admit that we're not very good at quantifying value on some of these petals, but I think the more we get better at them, the more of a signal we'll be sending innovator companies to make such drugs. Because I think patients certainly are using a much richer notion of value than the payers are using. Let me talk about what I call the Greg Lucier slides, these enabling technologies. So let me go through like 2 examples. One is we've seen we've seen a surprising increase in colon cancer rates in young men. So for 20 to 29-year-old young men in the United States, colon cancer rates have been growing at about 8% a year. These are young men. We don't understand why they've been growing at 8% a year. They've not been growing in older men. Right? In older men, the colon cancer rates are high, but they've not been growing. In young men, the colon cancer rates are low, but they've been growing rapidly. And we don't screen young men, we wouldn't screen them for colon cancer. And that's unfortunate because if you look all the way over on the right, colon cancer is one of those things where if you catch it early, you can treat it. And if you treat it, survival is actually quite good. So survival for patients who've been caught with localized colon cancer is so much higher than when we catch it metastatically. And so the question is, what prevents us from catching localized colon cancer? And the reason that we don't catch it is we don't screen for it. But we don't screen for it because colonoscopy is not a very good screening technology. It's this old technology. It was invented in the 1960s. Actually, mammograms were invented in the 1960s too. Pap smears were invented in the 1920s. Our scope scans and smears are all old. There's no medicine from the 1960s or 1920s that I would use to treat cervical cancer or colon cancer or breast cancer. And yet the diagnostic tools are stuck in the past. And this has many consequences, right? Like one of the things that it has is, you see with these 3 screening technologies, you see cancer when you look for it. It's a bit like a drunk person looking for their keys under the lamppost. The drunk person loses their keys and they go find them and they look right under the lamppost. It makes no sense, but that's the only place they can look. And the problem with that is the keys could have been left in the shadows. So similarly with us, there's many cancers hiding, occult cancers that are living in the shadows that we don't see until it's too late. We often catch ovarian cancer when it has progressed. We often catch pancreatic cancer when it has progressed. And because it's progressed, we're not able to treat it. But if we had this ability to catch it earlier, then we could treat it. And so the whole name of the game is, can we develop faster diagnostics that are accurate, but can catch disease in 20-year-old men, right? And so I'm drawn to these ideas around liquid biopsies, where with a single drop of blood, we might be able to find a circulating tumor cell that tells us that this young man who's 21 actually has colon cancer. And then we can go in there and treat that colon cancer early. It may not just be liquid biopsy, it could be pathology slides. So there's a variety of things we can do to improve the diagnostic skill of physicians. And I'm very excited about some of the innovation that's happening in that space, because this is the world that I want to live in. I want to live in a world where, if you have cancer, we catch it. The diagnostic light is shined on you. We catch the cancer, we treat it early. And if we treat it early, you go on to have a rich, productive life where you live to your capabilities. I think there's also a lot of innovation that is likely to happen in companion diagnostics. This would be a diagnostic technology that tells me whether a drug works in someone or doesn't work in someone. So an example of this would be, a lot of our drugs don't work, even great drugs like Avastin. This is bevacizumab. Its non-response rate is about 55-60%. So 55-60% of patients don't benefit from getting Avastin, but they get all the side effects of Avastin. They get a hole in their colon and all of that. We don't want to give Avastin to those patients, but we don't have a good biomarker that tells us in advance Avastin will work in one patient, but not in the other. But the more we can build those biomarkers, right? And I think we've started that journey, the better we will become at saying there's 3 types of patients. There are some patients who will respond to the medicine and not have side effects. Let's give them the medicine. There's another patient who will just not respond to the medicine. And there will be patients who maybe don't respond to the medicine and have side effects. That's the worst situation we're in, right? Where the patient is not benefiting, but still has all of the side effects. We can give other therapeutic options to those patients. So I think we have started to embark on the journey of describing and finding those biomarkers. We will probably be a lot better at doing this in 20 years. So it's, another way of saying, we don't just want new drugs, new medicines. We want better biomarkers and better diagnostic technologies. And so I'm going to end over there so that I have a chance to take some of your questions in our remaining time. I'm happy to take questions on, on all of this, on what we're doing at Harvard, what we're doing around the world, what some challenges, policy challenges are right now, and likely to be.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Professor. Let's, if you guys want to type any questions into the chat, and I'll kick it off with a couple. So San Diego's had some great technology companies, Lumina, Life Sciences, which obviously Thermo Scientific, board, etc. So how's that the whole DNA sequencing rolling out in terms of impacting life sciences and development of drugs?
Oh, so this is my great interest in San Diego. I think that Illumina single-handedly is going to create so much opportunity for us, because this kind of rapid sequencing might reveal genomic biomarkers that help me with the very last challenge, or proteomic biomarkers that help me with the very last challenge. And I think one of the things I realized about the ecosystem in Boston is that the ecosystem in Boston tends to be focused on making drugs, but not sequencing machines. And so that introduces like a bit of a blind spot into the program. And so I'm very keen to invite entrepreneurs from San Diego who work on different insights, right? Maybe different therapeutic insights, but different diagnostic insights, different sequencing insights. I want to get you involved in my program. I want you to tell me, or tell our students, actually, not me, what is it that you're working on, and why is it that you're working on it? And why is it important that our students know about it in the years to come? Tom, you have a great question about the Keck Graduate Institute program. I think it's an extraordinary program. We don't have any formal connection with them. We work with any program that reaches out to us and wants to, work with us, collaborate with us. We write cases. We want to see our cases used around the world. At the end of the day, we think that all of us should be working together, because the goal is to reduce human disease and increase investment in the life sciences. I'll tell you one difference that our program has with a lot of other MSMBA programs. Our MSMBA program is not really designed to compete with other MSMBA programs. So if I tell my students, don't come to our program if you want to build another kinase inhibitor, or you want to build another PD-1 inhibitor, don't come to our program. Go to one of the other existing programs that are out there. Come to our program if you want to understand next generation therapeutics. Come to our program if you want to understand ideas that are still in the lab that have not become drugs, that might become drugs. So that 10 years from now, when you're sitting in a venture capitalist seat, or you're running BD for a large biopharma company, you know what questions to ask of this brand new therapeutic that the world has never seen. How do you become the kind of investor that gave the world Moderna? That's who we're trying to produce, right? Who's the investor who's willing to take that kind of risk on an unknown? I mean, mRNA was unknown. It wasn't even nascent. It was unknown as a modality. It's a platform modality, but Flagship took that bet and gave us Moderna. How do you become that investor? So that's one key differentiator between our program and other programs, is that we're training students to think about medicines that have not yet been discovered, but that might rely on stem cell technology or regenerative medicine technology.
Okay. Also from Tom, he's asking about the UK NICE organization, or NIC, I'm not exactly sure which one it is, pose a model for valuing drugs for approval.
Yes and no. So the NICE is doing valuation, right? They do valuation, and their valuation has, one good thing about it and two bad things about it. The one good thing about it is that they're actually valuing the drugs. I like that a lot. I want to know that whatever I'm paying for my drugs is worth it. The problem with NICE is that it's the government doing the valuation, and the government's agenda often in doing the valuation is to think about the budget. Are we spending too much on drugs? And so even though NICE values the drug, it then multiplies, it assumes that the British public are only willing to pay $30,000 per life year for that drug. That's not true. If you look at the British income, if you look at how rich they are as a country, they're willing to pay about $120,000 per life year, but the government uses a number like 30,000. And so what that means is the value-based price in the UK is about a fourth as large as what the true value-based price would be in a market system or in a better system. So NICE, kind of internalizes the government's budget problem. And in my view, because of that internalization, doesn't do a very good job. It also doesn't use these richer notions of values. It counts up qualities, which I think is great. You should start with counting up qualities, but qualities are not the only notion of value, because qualities assume that like a year of life for a 15-year-old is going to be valued the same as a year of life for a 99-year-old. That's not true. Society values the extra year of life for the 15-year-old a lot more than the extra year of life for the 99-year-old. That's just a fact. And I think NICE just ignores that fact in the way it does its valuation, which is, again, it's an indictment of NICE, but it's something that could be fixed. But I think it's a problem when you've got the government doing the valuation instead of a private payer doing the valuation, who gets penalized if they do it wrong.
Let me ask a question about, you said earlier, colon cancer in young men is largely undetected because we're not screening for it. We are seeing a situation now where 20 million new Apple Watches are getting on people's wrists every year. And obviously it's measuring a lot of medical data and heart and AFib, et cetera. So we're going to bound to see a massive increase in the number of people who have AFib because we didn't screen it before. So the numbers are going to go up, but it's a good thing, right? Because we're finding it out.
Totally. And that, as long as we get it, as long as we catch the AFib correctly, correct diagnosis of AFib is what I'm assuming we're doing here, not overdiagnosis of AFib. So that's why, we want this to be a regulated industry. We don't just want people claiming that they've diagnosed AFib, but assuming that the diagnosis is correct, if we're able to treat it, and that treatment means more money is being spent, I think that's a good thing. That's valuable money that's being spent, because AFib is something that we know we are able to help patients with AFib. So again, simply thinking about the budget and what we're spending on healthcare is probably the wrong metric. We want to ask, what's the value of that spending for treating AFib? It could be incredibly, incredibly valuable. So even if we end up spending more on AFib, that could be a good thing for society.
And are we seeing tools that can help us lower the cost of development, whether it's big data or other things that because your chart, showed that the vast majority of these companies don't end up making any money, or for the investors. So, what do we need to do to lower the cost of development?
I think two things. One is I think we have to embed the scientists a lot better into the investment decision. That's one reason the MS MBA program was created, is that I think we need, not just MBAs making the investment decision, but scientists, MDs, PhDs, MSs making that investment decision better than has been made in the past. Number two, sometimes people think that the answer is more scientists. Well, no, because scientists might not understand cost of capital. Scientists might pay too much for good science. I mean, just because science is good doesn't mean that you can still overpay for science. Science can be very good, but the drug could be a commercial disaster because it's competing with a generic.
Right.
So a brand name drug that's just as good as a generic statin is actually like, who cares if it's scientifically exciting? It's just not going to be commercially successful. So I think you need kind of both degrees sitting at the same time. So that's one point. Second, Edward, I think that these companies will fail less if they were better grounded in understanding the heterogeneity of patient types. This goes back to the point about biomarkers, be they proteomic biomarkers, genomic biomarkers, epigenetic biomarkers. No drug works the same in one individual to another. And the better we are to understand that heterogeneity at the time of doing the clinical trial, the more we can do our trial in subgroups, the easier it will be to extract signal from those subgroups.
Great. Cool. Well, we're right on 1 o'clock. I know you're a busy guy, and we certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Chandra, and thank you everybody for being on. Hopefully this was very interesting, and so it's certainly kind of cool, cutting edge stuff for us.
Thank you, Edward. This was a pleasure and an honor. And if anyone's in Boston and wants to say hello, please do drop me a line. Thank you for joining.
Okay. Thank you. We'll end this now. Thank you. Okay.